I'm amazed to be here talking to you guys. Very, very excited about our upcoming project. I started as a barber in the 70s, and that was my springboard to eventually be brave enough to train at Sassoon in the early 70s. And even with them, I went as a barber originally because cutting hair, I have to say, is my passion, and I think that was the thing which sparked my imagination in the beginning, and I think it's been good to remain. I think one of the important things about me is that I've been sort of uncompromising, really, in a sense, that for me it's always been about the power of the cut, that amazing thing which captures the imagination of young, and I think particularly probably rebellious people. I feel as though, hairdressing in general, I think, creates a lot of passion in people. But the culture of cutting hair is really so extraordinary. And of course, once I got into Sassoon, and that's too long a story to go into, but it was a time of incredible change. So I went from being a barber to cutting women's hair and really loving doing that, making a stir within the company and creating leadership really within the company, and that being recognized was something absolutely incredible. And through that enabled me to touch the lives of many people, teaching and doing shows, beautiful shows all over the world. Continue that to this day, to capture the essence and the excitement and the power of cutting hair in its simplistic to its most elaborate, from its minimalistic to its most extravagant, whatever it can be. It can be all of those things once we have the training, and it gives us the ability to express ourselves through hair.
When did you join Sassoon? What level of a stylist were you? Were you an assistant then?
Well, I was a qualified. I'd done my apprenticeship as a barber, and I'd worked for a year in what was called a kind of unisex salon back then, and so I was cutting hair for women and men. However, the frustration of not really being able to do it correctly was just too much to bear. And I realized from an early age, I think we have a huge responsibility to our clients to be able to provide for their needs. And the minute that I felt that there was a moment when I began to feel that I'd let somebody down, and that weighed upon me so heavily that I had to be proactive, to really do something about that and embrace the future. And I realized to myself that really the future was about development and education.
Who was your muse when you first started off in the hairdressing industry? Who was your sort of...
I think I had...
Was it Sassoon back then? Was Sassoon...
I think the muse, I think probably mentor would be... muse would be... I loved, the Hairdressers Journal pictures from people in the 70s, people like the Carita sisters, Rosie and Marie Carita, did beautiful Sarah Moon type photography, very moody, very Bieber, very smoky eyes, very romantic pictures, very powerful, strong lighting. And these beautifully finished, essentially Bob's, Isadora's, shoulder length looks, but dressed into really beautiful shapes, very, very graphic, with incredible flow. And of course, the same thing was featured with Vidal, but in a much more sort of minimalistic way. So I think it was really about I think I was all about, sort of dial G for glamour when I was a kid. I grew up in Yorkshire. It was pretty miserable. Nobody had any money in the 70s. We had no hope. Where were our dreams going? And I think for me, there was always this sort of fantasy world outside of the real world. I call it Timmy world now. And it's literally, I think that I could find my passion, through hair, and it led me into other things, music and film and photography and all of that kind of thing. I became suddenly a collector of images and, thoughts and feelings. And they would be quite extreme. I remember as a kid reading about Andy Warhol and the Warhol factory, and within the factory when they were producing all those incredible artworks and films and all sorts of things going on, music. The Velvet Underground and Nico singing came on my radar as a youngster, but also the fact that they played Bohème Maria Callas. And so I think my parents thought it was quite weird when I came home from the record shop and I'd ordered the Velvet Underground and Maria Callas singing Puccini, or I don't know, whatever it was. I can't even remember, but for me it was a kind of link to the outside world of this kind of glamour and style, which...
Is that what attracted you to the industry?
Yeah, because it would be something which... the other thing I love about hair is that, you literally can... Vidal used to say, with a pair of scissors, we can change people's lives. Very clever thing to say on all levels, because it's visual, it's emotive, but it also sets the bar in education and everything. So it makes hairdressing important. I think we have to make it important. It is important in people's lives. I think that women who are hair involved are much happier and look far more beautiful than women and men who are not hair involved, unless you happen to be a supermodel.
Yeah.
But most people, we need as much help and support as we can possibly get, and that's our job, is to provide that.
Could you tell us your proudest moment?
I've had many proud moments, but I think that probably when Vidal came to my first solo show has to be amongst one of those things, because I heard that there was a rumour that he was going to come, but I thought that when he arrived it would cause such a stir that I would be aware of it. And it wasn't until virtually the end of the show, it was at Salon International, and it was really a big deal. I was nervous, I was a lot of things, but I felt like a new person. I was having a renaissance anyway, and I'd not been aware of the fact that Vidal and his wife Ronnie had come into the show, and they'd just taken a seat casually on the front row, of course. Now, I wasn't necessarily looking at the people individually, and then suddenly I had this realisation that Vidal was there, and he was doing this sort of face. He was really listening to what I was saying, and he was taking it all in and obviously evaluating it for himself. And I think if he hadn't liked it, he would have let me know. And it was a success. So that was an extremely proud moment, I think.
You've taken inspiration from all over the world. You've had the ability to travel and work with, alongside, and head up shows all over the world. What are the main countries that you've drawn down some of your, I mean, is it internationally based, or do you draw down some sort of cultural cultures, different?
I think looking
where do you
back,
get most of your inspiration from?
yeah, I think looking back, that's a really interesting question. I mean, obviously, the first time I went to Japan, there was this in the early 80s. The Japanese designers took Paris by storm with Ismiyaki, Comme des Garçons, and Yoji Yamamoto. And particularly with Yoji, with these sort of phantasmagorically romantical nomad clothes, which exaggerated the female form in a very, discreet and beautiful kind of way. The madness of Comme des Garçons was all about, deconstruction, and all of these things were so inspirational, at their time. But before that, I have to say, doing shows in Italy and in particularly in Milan and Florence, the heartlands of Italian fashion, and working in Paris, and seeing how the respect level that there was from the great masters of French hairdressing and Italian and Spanish hairdressing, all the icons, how they applauded, the Sassoon look, the London look, whatever. That was something, really incredible to be involved in. And, we were doing, shapes, with really short backs and bringing the levels high and creating mad textures and colours and things really to, kind of really turn everything on its head a little bit in these geographies that were known for being, very chic and beautiful. And then lo and behold, the French hairdressers did the coupe sauvage, the savage cut, and suddenly this kind of messy, sexy hair, rock and roll hair, however you want to describe it, was born out of punk and things that were so radical, and hair just became this amazing fusion of contradictions in a way. So you had the beauty thrown in with the ugly. I think that for me, extraordinary beauty doesn't necessarily mean that it's easy on the eye. I think that sometimes the things that are more difficult to look at are more beautiful. You mentioned about how the past influences our work, and I think a good example of that would be when, in terms of the social media today, I'll just find something, or see something from a fashion archive, and one of my projects had been featured by this amazing duo, Whitaker and Malum, and they do the most extraordinary clothing. It's almost like body armour with leather. They've worked for everybody. They did all the mannequins for Alan Jones' exhibition. They worked for Alexander McQueen when he was at Givenchy, and they've been there, forevermore. And in the early 90s, I did a project with them for Vidal at the Bauhaus, and it was featured. And I was so proud to see that happening in these extraordinary, I guess, like body armour that they'd made, and I'd made that choice to go with them, and I loved, again, the modernity and the kind of architectural feel of the clothing. Young people, it's good to know the history of where these ideas are coming from, and when you look at the 90s now, this was in the early 90s that this project happened. It's so influential within fashion now. And I thought to myself, well, actually, it's good to see, Tim, that you were on the mustard in the 90s, and you still are, because your work is referencing stuff that's happening now. Not in the everyday popular culture, but in the world of the avant-garde, in the world of high fashion, you know, in the world of stuff which is outer-worldly and not necessarily of this world.
Fashion designers look at the past to go into the future.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's the same with hair, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Should look at the past.
I think you should reference to know what's gone before. You know, because if you want to be a photographer, or you want to design clothing, you mentioned clothing, it's important to know how, you know, has a structure and how it's structured and how it becomes a something that has a structure not unlike a fantastic jacket or an amazing shirt or an incredible pair of jeans. You know, that there's parallels that can be made. And I think that I think you have to find your inspiration as well. You know, like once you, you know, sort of do a little bit of research and really study to see what you like. I mean, we don't all have to like the same thing, which is also, you know, extremely interesting. But I think it's fun to sort of dip in and out of different eras, different social trends, you know, whatever they may be. It's incredible when you see there's such a short window of some things which are so extreme, like pop, you know, in the 60s. It was a moment, and it was so powerful and so strong, but it was overtaken by this sort of hippie movement, which went for much longer, had much more longevity. But through pop, it was influenced by Dada and the 20s and Bauhaus and all of these things. So you end up with a massive mashup of ideas and themes and variations which enable you to create something which is new. So you're sort of plundering, you know, those eras and, you know, different forms of theatre, you know, music as we mentioned also.